Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty cool story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. So get cozy, enjoy it, and watch it till the end, guys.
My earliest memory is of hands. Small hands. Hands that could barely wrap around a single one of my fingers, pressing against my palm with a gentleness that I did not yet understand. I was perhaps 3 years old, though I cannot be certain of such things. Time has always been a concept that slips through my understanding like water through clenched fists. But I remember those hands, and I remember the voice that accompanied them, soft, patient, speaking words I could not fully grasp, but whose meaning touched something deep within me. There now, big one, gently. You must be gentle. Gentle. It was the first word I truly learned, and perhaps the most important, because everything about me, even then, was not gentle. I was already larger than the other children who lived in the habitation block where I had been placed. Already stronger, already capable of breaking things without meaning to, of hurting people without understanding that I had done so. The caretakers who watched over me in those early years had their hands full, and I know now that many of them were frightened of me. Not because I was cruel or mean-spirited, but because I was big, and I did not know my own strength. They called me Grim. I do not know if this was the name given to me at birth, or if it was a name chosen by the people who took me in after my homeworld was tithed. I have been told that I came from a place called Krork, one of many high-gravity prison worlds, where my people evolved over thousands of years. But I have no memory of it. My first memories are all of the hive city where I was raised, among baseline humans who looked at me with a mixture of pity, fear, and something else I could not name, something that felt like shame. I learned early that I was different, not just big, different. The word they used was abhuman, spoken sometimes with clinical detachment, sometimes with barely concealed disgust. I was not fully human, they said, though I came from human stock. My ancestors had been prisoners sent to a world where the gravity pulled so hard that bones had to grow thick and dense just to support the weight of flesh. Where survival meant becoming larger, stronger, tougher. Where thinking about complex things was less important than knowing how to find food, how to fight, how to endure. The Imperium, in its infinite wisdom, had decided that my kind were stable enough to be tolerated, useful enough to be preserved. We were strong. We were loyal. We would fight and die for the Emperor without question or complaint. And so we were allowed to exist, as long as we knew our place, as long as we did not forget that we were abhumans, mutants, forgiven perhaps, but never fully accepted. There was a litany they made us recite later, when I was old enough to join the planetary militia, words that we had to memorize and repeat before we were allowed to serve. I am an abhuman. I am unclean. I am a mutation of sacred human form. But the Emperor, in his mercy, has found me useful. I pledge my strength to his service. I pledge my life to his cause. I am forgiven, but I must never forget what I am. The first time I spoke those words, I felt something twist inside my chest, a feeling that I could not name, but that hurt worse than any physical wound I had ever received. Because part of me understood, even then, that these words were meant to remind me that I would always be less, always be other. No matter how hard I fought or how well I served, I would never truly be one of them. But I am getting ahead of myself. These thoughts come later, shaped by years of experience and by whatever small understanding my mind has managed to piece together. In those early years, in the cramped habitation block on the lower levels of Hive Morelius, I did not think about such things. I thought only about the immediate world around me, about the people who cared for me, about the simple pleasures and pains that filled my days. Growing up was hard, not because the people around me were intentionally cruel, but because everything in the world of baseline humans was too small for me. The beds were too narrow, too short. I would fall out of them in the night, crashing to the floor and waking the entire level with the sound of my massive body hitting the metal grating. The doorways were too low. I learned quickly to duck my head, but not before I had cracked my skull against countless lintels, leaving dents in the metal and blood on my scalp. The food portions were never enough. I was always hungry, a gnawing emptiness in my belly that never seemed to fade no matter how much I ate. My caretaker, a woman named Marna, who had taken responsibility for me when I was very young, would sometimes give me her own rations when she thought no one was looking. She was thin, too thin, and I know now that she went hungry so that I would not. But I was too young and too foolish to understand what that meant. I simply ate what was given to me and asked for more. Marna was patient with me in ways that I did not deserve. When I broke things, she did not yell or hit me as some of the others did. She would simply sigh, shake her head, and help me clean up the mess I had made. When I struggled to understand her instructions, when I stared at her with confusion written across my broad face, because the words she used were too complex for my simple mind to grasp, she would find simpler ways to explain. She would show me rather than tell me. She would take my hands in hers, those small, soft hands that I remember from my earliest memory, and guide them through the motions she wanted me to learn. Like this, Grim. Watch. See? Now you try. I learned to tie knots, though it took me months to master what other children could do in days. I learned to clean myself, though I was never very good at it. My thick fingers fumbled with fasteners and buckles. Water was always cold in the lower hive, and soap was rationed, and I never seemed to understand why it mattered so much whether I smelled clean or not. The other abhumans I had heard of, the ratlings with their small bodies and quick minds, were apparently quite fastidious. But Ogryns, they said, were not. We were dirty. We stank. We did not care about such things because we did not have the intelligence to understand why they were important. But Marna cared, and so I tried, for her sake, to be cleaner than came naturally to me. I would scrub my skin until it was raw, trying to meet the standards of the humans around me. It never seemed to be enough. There was always someone wrinkling their nose when I passed, always someone making a comment just loud enough for me to hear. But I tried, because Marna asked me to, because I did not want to disappoint her. She taught me other things too. She taught me to count, though I never got much past 10 before the numbers started to blur together in my mind. She tried to teach me to read, but the symbols on the data slates made no sense to me. They were just shapes, just lines and curves that might as well have been decorative patterns for all the meaning I could extract from them. After many months of trying, after seeing the frustration build in her eyes despite her best efforts to hide it, she finally gave up on teaching me to read. But she did not give up on me. "You have other gifts, Grim," she told me one evening as we sat together in her small quarters. She had been reading from a devotional text, speaking the words aloud so that I could hear them even if I could not read them myself. "You are strong, you are kind, you have a good heart. These things matter more than words on a page." I did not understand what she meant by a good heart. My heart was just an organ in my chest, pumping blood through my oversized body, working harder than a human heart because there was so much more of me to keep alive. But I liked the way she said it. I liked the way she looked at me when she spoke those words, with something in her, eyes that was not fear or disgust, something that felt warm. As I grew older, the differences between myself and the humans around me became more pronounced. By the time I was 8 years old, I stood nearly 7 feet tall. By 10, I had surpassed 8 feet. My shoulders were so broad that I could barely fit through standard doorways, even when I turned sideways. My hands were massive, each finger as thick as a grown man's wrist. My skull was dense, protected by thick ridges of bone that made my forehead protrude and gave my face a brutal, primitive appearance that frightened children and made adults step back when I approached. I had to be careful all the time. Every moment of every day was an exercise in restraint. When I picked something up, I had to consciously think about how hard I was squeezing. Too tight, and whatever I held would shatter or crumple in my grip. When I moved through the hab block, I had to watch where I placed my feet. More than once, I stepped on someone's possessions and crushed them flat without even noticing. When I interacted with other people, I had to remember not to pat them on the back with my full strength, not to shake their hands too firmly, not to move too quickly and accidentally knock them over. It was exhausting. And sometimes, despite my best efforts, I would forget. I would get excited about something, or angry, or just careless for a moment, and my control would slip. And then something would break, or someone would cry out in pain, and I would see that look on their faces again. The fear, the confirmation that yes, this creature is dangerous. Yes, we were right to be wary. The other children in the hab block learned to avoid me, not because I was mean to them, but because I was unpredictable. A game that might be fun when played between two human children became dangerous when I joined in. A playful push that would barely move another child could send a human tumbling across the room if I was the one doing the carl, pushing. And so I learned to play alone, to watch from the edges as others laughed and ran and enjoyed the simple pleasures of childhood that seemed forever out of my reach. There was one boy, though, who did not fear me. His name was Davin, and he was perhaps a year younger than I was, though he looked much older in many ways. His eyes had a hardness to them that spoke of things seen and endured. He had been born in the lower hive, unlike me, and he knew its ways better than I ever would. He was small, even for a human child, with quick hands and a quicker mind, and for reasons I never fully understood, he decided that I could be useful to him. Davin would come to me with problems that needed solving, heavy things that needed moving, doors that needed forcing open, bullies that needed discouraging, and I would help him because it felt good to be useful. It felt good to have someone need me for something other than causing trouble or taking up space. Davin never treated me like I was stupid. He never talked down to me or acted like I was a dangerous beast that needed to be managed. He would explain what he needed simply and clearly, and then he would trust me to do it. "Grim," he would say, "see that crate there? The big one. I need what's inside it. Can you move it for me?" And I would move it. I would lift things that 3 grown men could not budge. I would break locks with my bare hands. I would stand between Davin and older boys who wanted to hurt him, and my presence alone was usually enough to make them back down. I was not smart enough to understand that Davin was using me, that to him I was a tool, a means to an end. All I understood was that he was my friend. He was the only person my age who would talk to me, who would seek me out, who seemed to value my presence. It was Davin who first told me about the Imperial Guard. We were perhaps 12 and 13 years old respectively, though I looked like I could be 20, and he still looked like a child. We were sitting on one of the catwalks that crisscrossed the lower hive, watching the flow of workers below as they trudged to and from their shifts in the manufactorums. "You know what you should do, Grim," Davin said, his legs dangling over the edge of the catwalk in a way that made me nervous. I was always worried he would fall. He was so small, and the drop was so far. "You should join the guard. They'd take you in a heartbeat. Big Ogryn like you. They'd put you in the Militarum Auxilia, give you a fancy gun, send you off to fight the Emperor's enemies." "Fight?" I repeated. The word tasted strange in my mouth. I had fought before, in the scuffles and struggles of hive life, but I had never thought of fighting as something you could do as a job, as something official. "Yeah, fight. Kill bad guys. Serve the Emperor. It's better than staying here, I'll tell you that. Better than working in the manufactorums until you drop dead from exhaustion or get crushed by falling. Machinery. At least in the guard, you get to see other worlds. Get to do something that matters." The idea took root in my mind, though I did not fully understand it at the time. Fighting for the Emperor. Serving a purpose beyond simply existing. Being part of something larger than myself. It appealed to something deep within me. Some instinct that had been bred into my kind over countless generations. We were made for war, after all. Our bodies were built for violence, for endurance, for standing firm in the face of horrors that would break smaller, frailer beings. But I did not join the guard immediately. I was still young, still needed by Mana, still trying to find my place in the world of the hive. It would be several more years before I finally took that step. Several more years of growing, of learning, of slowly coming to understand what I was and what I could be. During those years, I began to hear more about the Emperor. The Ministorum priests would sometimes come to the lower hive, bringing with them their messages of faith and redemption. They spoke of the Emperor of mankind, the master of humanity, the God Emperor who watched over all his children from his throne on distant Terra. They spoke of duty and sacrifice, of faith and service, of finding meaning through dedication to a cause greater than oneself. I did not understand most of what they said. Their sermons were full of big words and complex ideas that slipped through my grasp like sand through fingers. But I understood the core of it. The Emperor loved his people, all of his people, even humans like me, even Ogryns who were big and simple and easily confused. We had a place in his plan. We had value in his eyes. And if we served faithfully, if we gave everything we had to his cause, then we would be forgiven for the sin of our deviation from baseline humanity. This idea struck me with unexpected force. The Emperor loved me, despite what I was, despite my ugly face and my limited mind and my status as something less than fully human. He loved me, and he wanted me to serve him. The thought made something warm bloom in my chest, a feeling of belonging that I had never quite experienced before. I was not just Grim the Ogryn. I was Grim, servant of the Emperor. I had purpose. I had meaning. I began to attend the sermons regularly, standing at the back where my massive bulk would not block the view of those behind me. I would listen to the priests speak of the Emperor's glory. I would join in the prayers, stumbling over the words, but meaning every one of them. I would look at the images they showed us, the depictions of the Emperor in his golden armor, radiating light and power and goodness, and I would feel that warmth grow stronger. Mana noticed the change in me. She saw me kneeling in prayer before bed, my oversized hands clasped together in a gesture of devotion that must have looked comical on someone my size. She saw the Aquila pendant I had acquired, too small for my neck, so I wore it on a leather cord that hung down across my massive chest. She saw the way I spoke of the Emperor, with something approaching reverence in my rough voice. "Faith is a good thing, Grim," she told me one evening. "The Emperor protects. He watches over all of us. But remember that faith should make you kind, not hard. Remember that the Emperor loves mercy as much as strength." I nodded, though I was not entirely sure what she meant. But I trusted Mana. If she said faith should make me kind, then I would try to be kind. I would try to use my strength to help rather than hurt. I would try to be worthy of the Emperor's love. When I turned 16, I made my decision. I would join the Planetary Defense Forces, and from there, I hoped to be selected for service in the Imperial Guard. I would become a soldier. I would fight for the Emperor. I would prove that an Ogryn could be more than just a mindless brute. I would make Mana proud. I would make the Emperor proud. The day I told Mana of my decision, she wept. I had seen her cry before, but never like this. These were not tears of sadness, though there was sadness there. They were something more complex, something I did not have the understanding to pass. She held my hand, her small fingers wrapping around one of my massive digits, and she smiled through her tears. "I knew this day would come," she said. "You were never meant to stay in the hive forever, Grim. You have too much strength to waste it here. But promise me something. Promise me you will remember what I taught you. Promise me you will be gentle when you can. Promise me you will protect the smaller ones, the weaker ones. Promise me you will come back." I promised. I promised all of it, though I did not fully understand the weight of what I was promising. I did not understand that war changes people, that the things I would see and do in service to the Emperor would mark me in ways that could not be undone. I only knew that I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to honor the years she had spent raising me, teaching me, caring for me when no one else would. The recruitment process for the Planetary Defense Forces was simple. They took one look at me, confirmed that I was of Ogryn stock, and signed me up immediately. No tests of intelligence or aptitude. No questions about my background or my education. Just a cursory physical examination to make sure I was healthy. A quick sermon about duty to the Emperor. And then I was in. I was given a uniform that had to be specially modified to fit my frame, boots that weighed more than some men could lift, and instructions to report to the training grounds at dawn the next day. The other recruits stared at me when I arrived. Most of them were baseline humans, young men and women from various parts of the hive, all looking small and soft and terribly fragile to my eyes. But there were a few other Ogryns as well, scattered among the crowd. We found each other quickly, drawn together by an instinct that ran deeper than words. We were the same. We understood each other in ways that the humans never could. There was Targek, who came from a mining colony in the outer wastes. His hands were scarred from years of working with heavy machinery, and he spoke even less than I did. There was Brutus, who had been pressed into service after getting into trouble with the local enforcers. He was angry, always angry, his massive fists clenching and unclenching as if he was looking for something to hit. And there was Gorsh, the oldest of us, who had served in the guard before and had been discharged after taking a wound that would have killed a normal human, but only left him with a limp and a deep scar across his chest. Gorsh became our unofficial leader, the one we looked to when we did not understand the orders we were given. He had experience, he knew how things worked, and most importantly, he knew how to survive. He taught us to listen carefully, to do exactly what we were told and nothing more. He taught us not to ask questions, because questions made the officers nervous, and nervous officers were dangerous. He taught us to stay together, to watch each other's backs, to remember that we were brothers even if we had never met before that day. The training was not particularly difficult for us, physically. We were strong, we could run for hours without tiring, could carry loads that would break the backs of baseline humans, could endure pain that would incapacitate others. But the mental aspects of training were harder. Learning to respond to complex orders, learning to work as a unit, learning to control our strength so that we did not accidentally injure our fellow soldiers during training exercises. The drill sergeants quickly learned that subtlety did not work with Ogryns. If they wanted us to do something, they had to be direct. They had to use simple words and clear gestures. They had to repeat themselves until they were certain we all understood. And even then, mistakes happened. Commands misunderstood. Orders carried out too literally or not literally enough. Equipment broken through clumsiness or excessive force. But we learned. Slowly, painfully, but we learned. We learned to fire the Ripper guns they gave us, massive automatic shotguns that were nearly as long as a human was tall. We learned to throw the oversized grenades, simple stick bombs that we could hurl much farther than any baseline human could manage. We learned the basic formations and movements, the simple tactics that would keep us alive on the battlefield. And we learned the Imperial Creed. Every morning began with prayers. Every evening ended with devotions. We were taught to see the Emperor in everything. He was in the sun that rose over the training ground. He was in the food we ate. He was in the strength of our bodies and the loyalty in our hearts. Everything we did for him. Every hardship we endured for him. And when the time came to fight, we would fight for him with every ounce of strength we possessed. I embraced this with a fervor that surprised even me. The faith that had been growing in my heart since I first heard those Ministorum priests now bloomed into something all-consuming. The Emperor was my father, my master, my God. I lived to serve him. I would die for him gladly, without question or hesitation. This simple, pure faith was something I could understand in a way that more complex philosophies could not reach. It filled a hole in my spirit that I had not known existed. The other Ogryns felt it too. When we prayed together, when we chanted the litanies and sang the hymns in our deep, rumbling voices, I could see the same devotion in their eyes. We were the Emperor's children, just as much as any baseline human. Perhaps we were not as clever. Perhaps we were not as refined. But our faith was pure. Our loyalty was absolute. And that had to count for something. After 6 months of training, word came down that several of us would be selected for possible augmentation. The procedure was called BONE, Biochemical Ogryn Neural Enhancement, and it was supposed to make us smarter. Not human smart, they were quick to clarify, but smart enough to follow more complex orders. Smart enough to lead other Ogryns, smart enough to be valuable beyond our simple strength and loyalty. I was chosen, so were Targek and Gorsh. Brutus was not. When they told us we had been selected, Brutus raged. He did not understand why he was not good enough, why they had chosen us and not him. The drill sergeant tried to explain that it was not a punishment, that not everyone was selected, that there were only so many slots available. But Brutus did not understand, or perhaps he understood too well, and that was what made him so angry. He was being told once again that he was not good enough, that he was less than. The bone procedure itself was not pleasant. They took us to a medici facility, had us lie down on tables that creaked under our weight, and then began the process. There were injections, many injections, chemicals pumped into our veins that made our bodies burn and our heads throb with pain. There were augmetics installed, tiny machines implanted in our skulls that would help regulate our brain chemistry and enhance our cognitive functions. The surgeon who performed my procedure was a small, nervous man who kept glancing at me as if I might wake up mid-surgery and tear him apart. He spoke to the medici servitors, helping him in technical terms I did not understand. But I understood the fear in his voice. I understood that he saw me as something dangerous, something barely controlled, something that might revert to savagery at any moment. I wanted to tell him that I would not hurt him, that I was a good person, that I was trying my best to be gentle, to be kind, to be worthy of the faith that Mana had placed in me. But I could not speak. The anesthesia was already pulling me down into darkness, and my last conscious thought was a prayer to the Emperor to guide the surgeon's hands and to make me worthy of this gift. When I woke, everything was different. Not dramatically, not like I had suddenly become as smart as a baseline human, but there was a clarity to my thoughts that had not been there before. Concepts that had been foggy and indistinct now had edges, shapes, substance. I could follow chains of logic that previously would have tangled themselves into knots in my mind. I could remember things with greater precision. I could understand orders that would have left me confused before. The medici staff ran tests. They asked me questions, had me perform tasks, evaluated my responses. When they were done, they declared the procedure a success. I was now officially a bonehead, marked with an aquilar branded into the flesh of my upper arm. I would be given sergeant's rank when I was assigned to a unit. I would be responsible for leading other Ogryns, for translating the commands of human officers into terms my fellow abhumans could understand and follow. The change was not without its challenges. The implant made my head ache sometimes, a deep throbbing pain that settled behind my eyes and would not fade no matter how much I rested. Sometimes I would find myself thinking about things that Ogryns were not supposed to think about, questioning things that I should simply accept, seeing complexities in situations that would have seemed simple before. But mostly, I was grateful. Grateful for the enhanced clarity. Grateful for the ability to better serve the Emperor. Grateful for the increased value I now represented to the Imperium. I was no longer just another Ogryn. I was special. I had been chosen. I had been improved. And I would prove myself worthy of this honor. When I returned to the training grounds, I found that I had been separated from most of the other Ogryns I had trained with. Targek and Gorsh were in different units now, assigned to different regiments. I was placed with a group of baseline human soldiers and told that I would be their specialist attachment, providing heavy assault capability and acting as a bodyguard for the unit's officer. The officer was a woman named Lieutenant Kavros. She was small, even by human standards, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. She looked at me with undisguised skepticism when I first reported to her, clearly not thrilled about having an Ogryn attached to her unit. "Can you follow orders, Bonehead?" she asked, her arms crossed over her chest. "Yes, sir," I replied, the enhanced clarity of the bone implant helping me form the words more clearly than I would have managed before. "I follow orders good. I protect. I fight when you say fight." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "We'll see. The Emperor protects, and I'm told you do too. Don't make me regret this assignment." Over the following months, as we trained together, and eventually deployed on our first campaign, Lieutenant Kavros came to trust me. It was not easy. Trust is something that must be earned, especially when you are an Ogryn and the person you are asking to trust. You have seen what creatures like you can do when they lose control. But I was careful. I was gentle when I could be. I followed every order exactly as given. I protected her and the soldiers under her command with a dedication that bordered on obsessive. Our first deployment was to a world called Tertia Minor, a frontier planet that had been invaded by greenskin raiders. The enemy was fierce and numerous, pouring out of crude ships and falling upon the Imperial settlements with savage enthusiasm.
I have to pause here for a moment because this part of the story hits differently. I think we've all felt like Grimm at some point, trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for us, being judged for the things we can't control. That's what makes 40K so compelling, right? Even in his absurdly grimdark setting with space marines and demons, there are these deeply human stories about belonging and acceptance. It's why I keep coming back to this universe. The big battles are cool, but it's these character moments that really stay with me. Anyways, back to the story.
It was my first real battle, and I remember the fear that gripped me as the dropship carried us down through the atmosphere. Not fear of the enemy, fear that I would fail, fear that I would let Lieutenant Kavros down, fear that I would prove the doubters right, that I was just a dumb brute who would panic and run or lose control and hurt my own side. But when the fighting started, instinct took over. The bone enhancement helped me process the chaos of battle, helped me understand the orders being shouted over the Vox, helped me coordinate with the human soldiers around me. But the fighting itself came naturally. It was what I had been bred for, what my body was designed to do. I charged into the greenskin lines with my ripper gun blazing, the heavy shells tearing through enemy flesh and armor. I used my massive fist to crush skulls and break bones. I stood over wounded soldiers and held off entire mobs of the enemy while they were evacuated to safety. There is a joy in battle that I hesitate to admit to. It feels wrong, somehow, to take pleasure in killing. But there is a savage satisfaction in using my strength for its intended purpose, in being useful, in protecting others, in serving the Emperor through violence done in his name. The greenskins fell before me like wheat, before a scythe, and I felt powerful in a way I had never experienced before. This was what I was meant to do. This was my purpose. We held that world. We drove back the greenskin tide and saved the Imperial citizens who had been trapped by the invasion. And when it was over, when the counting of the dead and wounded was complete, Lieutenant Kavros stood before me in the smoking ruins of the battlefield and looked up at my towering form. "You did well, Bonehead," she said. "You did very well. I'm glad you're with us." Those simple words meant more to me than any medal or commendation could. She was glad I was with them. I had proven myself. I had earned a place in her unit, not just through my strength, but through my actions, my dedication, my willingness to lay down my life for the soldiers I served alongside. That was just the first of many campaigns. Over the years that followed, I fought on dozens of worlds against enemies whose names I often could not pronounce. Against greenskins and cultists, against traitors and xenos, against horrors that defied description. I saw things that would haunt a baseline human for the rest of their days. I did things that would break a gentler soul. But I endured. We all endured. Because that was what we did. That was what we were made for. Through it all, I tried to hold on to the lessons Mana had taught me. To be gentle when I could. To protect the weak. To remember that strength without mercy was just brutality. It was not always easy. The battlefield does not reward gentleness. And there were times when I had to kill when I would have preferred to spare. Times when I had to watch soldiers die and know that I could not save them all. Times when the horrors of war threatened to overwhelm even my enhanced understanding. But I had my faith. I had the Emperor. And I had the bonds I formed with the soldiers I served alongside. The baseline humans in Lieutenant Kavros's unit came to accept me, came to see me as more than just a weapon or a tool. They gave me a nickname, Boulder, because I was as big and immovable as a rock when I dug in to hold a position. They shared their rations with me when I was hungry. They told me stories and jokes that I often did not quite understand, but laughed at anyway because it felt good to be included. There was one soldier in particular, a man named Jareth, who became something like a friend to me. He was a Vox operator, responsible for maintaining communications between our unit and command. He was young, perhaps 20 standard years, with a quick smile and a kind manner. He did not seem to be afraid of me at all, and he would often sit with me after battles, when the adrenaline had faded and everyone was settling in for whatever brief rest we could manage. "Tell me about your home, Boulder," he would say. "What was it like growing up in the hive?" And I would try to tell him, though my words were clumsy and my memories were not always clear. I would speak of Mana and of Darvan. I would describe the lower levels of Hive Marelius and the catwalks and the endless noise of the manufactorums. I would try to explain what it felt like to be an Ogryn growing up in a human world, always too big, always too slow, always too different. Jareth listened with genuine interest. He asked questions. He seemed to actually care about my answers, and sometimes he would share his own stories in return. He came from an agri-world, he told me. A place where the fields stretched to the horizon, and the sky was open and blue, not choked with smog and pollution like the hive worlds. He spoke of his family, of his younger sister, who he hoped was still safe back home. He spoke of his dreams of returning there someday, of the life he wanted to build after his service was complete. I did not have such dreams. My life was the guard now. My purpose was to fight and to protect. But I listened to Jareth's dreams, and I found myself hoping that he would achieve them, that he would survive the wars we fought and return to his agri-world and see his sister again, that some small part of the beauty he described would be preserved in the galaxy's endless violence. But war is cruel, and it takes without mercy or reason. During a campaign against heretic cultists on a world called Vanitas Hope, our unit came under heavy fire from enemy positions that we had not known were there. The cultists had heavy weapons, and they opened up on us as we were crossing an open area, caught in the worst possible position. Soldiers fell around me, cut down by the murderous fire. I heard Lieutenant Kavros shouting orders, trying to organize a retreat, trying to save who she could. And then I saw Jareth go down. He had been running toward cover, his Vox pack heavy on his back, when something hit him, a shell or a bullet, I could not tell. He fell hard, and I saw blood spreading across his uniform. He was still moving, still alive, but he was hurt badly, and he was in the open, exposed to the continued fire from the enemy positions. I did not think. I simply acted. I ran toward him, my massive legs carrying me across the battlefield with surprising speed. Bullets and shells struck my thick hide, and I felt pain bloom across my body, but I did not stop. I reached Jareth and scooped him up as gently as I could, cradling his small body against my chest. And then I ran for cover, using my own bulk as a shield between him and the enemy fire. I made it to the safety of a ruined building and set Jareth down carefully. The medici was there, and they went to work immediately, trying to stabilize him. But I could see in their faces that it was bad, too much damage, too much blood loss. Even as they worked, I knew they were fighting a losing battle. Jareth looked up at me, his face pale, his breath coming in short gasps. "Boulder," he whispered. Thanks for trying. You will be okay," I told him, though I did not believe it. "Medici will fix. You will go home. See sister. See fields." He smiled, just a little. "Yeah, Tell her. Tell my sister. I was thinking of her. Okay? I tell her, I promised, though I had no idea how I would ever find his sister or deliver such a message. But it seemed important to him, so I promised. And then he was gone. The light faded from his eyes, and he went still in a way that was unmistakable. The medici stepped back, shaking their heads. Another soldier lost. Another name to be added to the rolls of the honored dead. Another person I had failed to protect. I carried Jareth's body out of that ruined building when the fighting was over, carried him to where they were collecting the fallen, preparing them for whatever funeral rites could be managed in the field. And as I laid him down, as gently as if he were still alive, and I was afraid of hurting him, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my ribs or my sternum, something deeper, something that the bone implant had perhaps made me capable of feeling more acutely than an unaugmented Ogryn would have. Grief. I was grieving. For Jareth, for all the others who had died, for the simple cruelty of a galaxy that took kind young men and turned them into corpses before they had a chance to live the lives they dreamed of. Lieutenant Kavros found me there, standing over Jareth's body. She stood beside me in silence for a long moment, and then she placed a hand on my arm. Her hand was so small, it did not even reach halfway around my forearm, but the gesture was enough. "He knew you cared about him," she said quietly. "He told me once that you were the best friend he'd made in the Guard. He said you were braver and kinder than most baseline humans he'd met. He was right." I did not trust myself to speak. My throat was tight, and I knew that if I tried to form words, I would only embarrass myself. So I simply nodded, and we stood there together, honoring the memory of a good man who had deserved better than the death he had received. The campaigns continued. They always continued. There was always another war, another front, another enemy that needed to be fought. I served in the Guard for years, and the soldiers I fought alongside changed. Some transferred to other units. Some were promoted and moved on to bigger things. Some died, and their places were taken by fresh recruits who looked at me with the same mixture of fear and curiosity that I had seen so many times before. But through it all, I tried to be worthy of the faith that Mana had placed in me, worthy of the friendship that Jareth had offered, worthy of the trust that Lieutenant Kavros continued to show, worthy of the Emperor's love. I was an Ogryn. I was an abhuman. I was different, and I would always be different. But I could still serve. I could still protect. I could still be gentle when the galaxy allowed it, and fierce when it demanded it. I learned, over those years, that being an Ogryn raised by humans was both a blessing and a curse. The blessing was that I understood humans in a way that Ogryns raised on their homeworlds never could. I knew their customs, their fears, their dreams. I could communicate with them after a fashion and find common ground even when everything about me seemed designed to set me apart. I had been taught by Mana to value kindness and mercy, concepts that were often foreign to Ogryns, who had been raised in the brutal, primitive conditions of the high-gravity prison worlds. But the curse was that I could never fully be one of them. No matter how well I served, no matter how many lives I saved or battles I won, I would always be other, always be abhuman, always be marked by my deviation from the sacred human form. I would recite the litany that reminded me I was unclean. I would see the way people stepped back when I approached. I would hear the whispered comments about how dangerous I was, how unpredictable, how barely controlled. And sometimes, late at night when the camp was quiet and everyone else was asleep, I would lie awake and wonder what Mana would think if she could see me now, if she would be proud of the soldier I had become, or disappointed by the violence I had committed, if she would still see in me the gentle giant she had raised, or if war had burned that gentleness away and left only the brute that everyone expected me to be. I never went back to Hive Morelius. The campaigns took me farther and farther from the world where I had grown up, and after a while, the idea of returning seemed impossible. I did not know if Mana was even still alive. Life in the lower hive was hard, and she had not been young when I left. But I held her memory close, a reminder of who I wanted to be, even when the battlefield demanded I be something else. There were moments, scattered throughout those years of service, that I treasure more than any medal or commendation. Moments when the wall between human and abhuman seemed to thin, when connection happened, despite all the reasons it should not have been possible. Like the time a young soldier, barely out of training, froze during his first battle. He was supposed to be advancing with the rest of the unit, but fear had locked his limbs and left him standing in the open, an easy target. I saw him there, saw the terror in his eyes, and I remembered what it felt like to be so scared that you could not move. So I stepped in front of him, used my body as a shield, and I spoke to him as gently as my rough voice would allow. "Is okay," I told him. "You are scared, is normal, but you, not alone. I protect you. Come, we go together." And I held out my massive hand to him. He stared at it for a moment, this hand that could crush his skull without effort, and then he took it. He let me guide him forward, let me keep him safe as we advanced. And when the battle was over, when we had secured the objective and the immediate danger had passed, he looked up at me with something like wonder in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. I'm sorry I froze. I was so scared." "Everyone's scared sometimes," I replied. "Is okay. You did good. You stayed. You fought. Is what matters." He nodded, and then he did something unexpected. He hugged me, or tried to. His arms barely reached halfway around my waist, but the gesture was clear. And I felt that warmth again, that sense of connection that I had been taught to value by a woman who had seen past my size and my difference to the person underneath. Or the time when a medici officer, exhausted after days of treating the wounded, found me sitting alone during a rare moment of downtime. She sat down beside me without asking permission, without showing any of the hesitation that most people displayed around Ogryns. She was too tired to be afraid, perhaps. Or maybe she was just kind. "You're Boulder, right?" she asked. "Lieutenant Kavros is Ogryn." "Yes," I confirmed. "I am Boulder." "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for bringing in the wounded. You've saved a lot of lives by getting injured soldiers back to the aid station quickly. Some of them wouldn't have made it if you hadn't carried them. I wanted you to know that it matters, that you matter." Such simple words, but they struck deep, because so often it felt like I was just a tool, just a weapon, just a big, dumb brute whose only value was in how much destruction I could cause or how much damage I could absorb. To be told that I mattered, that my efforts were seen and appreciated, was a gift I had not expected and did not deserve. "I do my duty," I said, not knowing how else to respond. "I serve Emperor. I protect small ones." "Well, you're good at it," she replied. And then she patted my arm, a gesture of affection and respect, before standing and returning to her work. These moments sustained me. They reminded me why I fought. They gave meaning to the violence and the loss and the endless grinding horror of warfare. I was not just killing. I was protecting. I was serving. I was being gentle when I could, and fierce when I must. I was living up to the lessons Mana had taught me, and the faith the Emperor had placed in me. But there were darker moments too. Moments when the strain of being different, of being other, became too heavy to bear. Times when I felt the weight of every suspicious glance, every whispered comment, every reminder that I was tolerated but not truly accepted. Times when I wondered if it would have been better to be raised on an Ogryn homeworld, among my own kind, rather than among humans who would never fully see me as one of them. There was a new lieutenant who took over our unit after Lieutenant Kavros was promoted to captain and transferred to a different regiment. This new officer, Lieutenant Harkin, made no secret of his distrust of abhumans. He referred to me as the mutant and made it clear that he kept me around only because regulations required it and because my combat effectiveness was undeniable. "Don't mistake tolerance for acceptance, Ogryn," he told me once. "You're useful, I'll grant you that, but you're not one of us. You'll never be one of us. So just follow orders and stay out of my way." His words hurt more than they should have. I had served faithfully for years. I had proven my loyalty 1,000 times over. But to him, none of that mattered. I was still just a mutant, still just an abhuman who was lucky to be allowed to exist at all. I tried not to let it affect me. I tried to focus on my duty, on the soldiers I protected, on the emperor I served. But the words burrowed deep, and sometimes when I was alone, I would find myself reciting that litany they had taught us. I am an abhuman. I am unclean. I am a mutation of sacred human form. And the words tasted like ash in my mouth. It was during this time, when I was perhaps 25 years old, though I looked much older, that I began to question things in ways that the bone implant had made possible, but that I had not previously engaged with. I began to wonder why abhumans were considered forgiven rather than simply accepted. Why our deviation from baseline humanity was treated as a sin that required constant atonement. The emperor was supposed to love all his children, but why did some of his children have to spend their lives apologizing for the circumstances of their birth? I did not voice these questions. To question the doctrines of the imperial creed was dangerous, bordering on heretical, but they lived in my mind, troubling the simple faith I had once possessed. The bone implant had given me enhanced understanding, but with that understanding came complexity, and complexity, I was learning, was often painful. I thought often of Brutus, the Ogryn who had not been selected for bone enhancement. I wondered if he was happier than I was, if his simpler understanding allowed him to accept his place without the doubts that plagued me, if ignorance truly was a blessing, as some claimed. But then I would remember Jareth. I would remember the young soldier who had frozen in battle. I would remember all the times my enhanced understanding had allowed me to save lives or complete missions, or protect people who needed protecting. And I would realize that despite the pain of awareness, despite the burden of complexity, I would not trade my bone enhancement for anything, because it allowed me to be better at my purpose. It allowed me to serve more effectively, and service, in the end, was all I had. The wars continued. They seemed endless, a constant cycle of deployment and combat, and brief periods of rest before the next deployment. I fought on ice worlds and desert worlds, in hive cities, and on battlefields that stretched to the horizon. I faced enemies that ranged from pathetically weak to terrifyingly powerful. And through it all, I endured, because that was what Ogryns did. We endured. Lieutenant Harkin eventually learned to trust me, though he never truly warmed to me. He came to rely on my strength and my loyalty, even if he never saw me as fully worthy of respect. When he was badly wounded during a battle against heretic cultists, I was the one who carried him to safety, using my body to shield him from enemy fire, just as I had done for so many others. As I ran with him cradled in my arms, hearing him scream with pain from his injuries, I wondered if he understood the irony. He despised me for being different, but when his life was in danger, it was my difference that saved him. He recovered from his wounds, and he never thanked me for saving his life. But he did stop referring to me as the mutant, and started using my name, Boulder. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Names matter. They are an acknowledgement of personhood, of individuality, of value beyond mere function. To be called by my name, even by someone who still saw me as lesser, was a victory of sorts. Years passed. I rose to become the de facto leader of the Ogryn contingent attached to our regiment. There were 5 of us now, including me. I trained them, guided them, translated orders from the human officers into terms they could understand. I taught them to be gentle when they could and fierce when they must. I tried to pass on the lessons that Mana had taught me, though I often felt inadequate to the task. I was not a teacher. I was just an Ogryn who had been fortunate enough to be raised by a kind human woman and fortunate enough to receive enhancement that made me slightly less stupid than my brothers. But they looked to me for leadership, and I did my best to provide it. I showed them how to control their strength, how to work alongside baseline humans without frightening them, how to earn trust through consistent, reliable service. I taught them prayers to the Emperor and helped them understand why we fought. I told them that they had value, that they were more than just weapons, that they could be heroes in their own right. Sometimes I wondered if they believed me. Sometimes I wondered if I believed it myself. One of the younger Ogryns in our group, a boy named Crag, who had joined the regiment only a year ago, reminded me of myself at that age. He was eager to please, quick to apologize when he made mistakes, desperate to prove that he was worthy of the trust placed in him. He had not been raised by humans as I had. He came from an Ogryn homeworld, where strength and violence were the only currencies that mattered. But there was a gentleness to him underneath the brutish exterior, a quality that I recognized and valued. I took special care with Crow, teaching him not just how to fight, but how to be more than a simple killer. I showed him how to be careful with his strength, how to communicate with the human soldiers, how to find meaning in service beyond just following orders. He absorbed these lessons like a sponge, and I saw in him the possibility of what Ogryns could be if they were given the chance to be more than what others expected of them. During a campaign against an Orcish invasion, Crag saved the life of a human soldier by throwing himself between the soldier and an enemy that would have killed him. He took wounds that would have been fatal to a baseline human, but his thick hide and dense musculature allowed him to survive. When I found him afterward, lying in a pool of his own blood, but still breathing, still alive, he looked up at me with pride in his eyes. "I did good, yes?" he asked. "I protected Small One?" "You did very good," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "You were hero. Emperor is proud. I am proud." He smiled then, despite the pain he must have been in. And I realized that this was why I endured. Not for the thanks or the recognition, not even for the Emperor, though he was always there in my prayers, but for moments like this, for the chance to help other Ogryns become more than what they were expected to be, for the opportunity to prove that we were not just mindless brutes, but beings capable of courage and sacrifice and even nobility. Crow recovered from his wounds, though he bore the scars for the rest of his life. The human soldier he saved sought him out afterward and thanked him personally. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to Crag. He talked about it for weeks, kept repeating what the soldier had said, kept touching the spot where the human had clasped his massive hand in gratitude. It was proof that he mattered, that his service had value, that he was more than just a weapon. I understood how he felt, because I had felt it too, every time someone showed me genuine kindness or respect. Every time someone saw past my size and my difference to the person underneath. These moments were rare, but they were precious. They were what made the hardship bearable. As I grew older, as my body began to show the wear of decades of warfare, I found myself thinking more and more about Marna. I wondered if she was still alive. I wondered what she would think of the person I had become. I wondered if she would recognize in me the child she had raised, or if war had changed me too much. I wondered if I had lived up to her teachings, or if I had failed her in some fundamental way. I never found out. The Imperium is vast beyond comprehension, and the chances of ever returning to Hive Moralius, of finding one specific person in the teeming billions who inhabit such places, were effectively zero. Marna remained a memory, a ghost of kindness, in a universe that too often seemed devoid of it. But the lessons she taught me lived on. They shaped how I led my Ogryn brothers. They influenced how I interacted with the humans I served alongside. They reminded me that strength without mercy was just brutality, and that even in the grim darkness of the far future, there was room for gentleness. The years of service took their toll. My body, tough as it was, could not endure forever. Wounds accumulated, bones that had been broken and healed, ached in the cold. My thick hide bore scars upon scars, a roadmap of every battle I had survived. My enhanced mind, courtesy of the bone implant, had given me understanding but also awareness of my own mortality. I knew that one day, perhaps soon, I would fall in battle. That some enemy would finally overwhelm my defenses and send me to whatever afterlife awaited those who served the Emperor faithfully. I was not afraid of death. How could I be, when I had faced it so many times? But I was afraid of dying without purpose. I was afraid of falling before I had done enough, before I had protected enough, before I had proven that Ogryns could be more than what others believed us to be. During what turned out to be one of my final campaigns, we were deployed to a hive world that had been overrun by cultist forces. The enemy had turned entire sections of the hive into fortified positions, and our regiment was tasked with breaking through their defenses and reclaiming the territory for the Imperium. It was brutal, grinding warfare, the kind that claimed lives by the hundreds and gave ground only meter by bloody meter. My squad of Ogryns fought at the forefront, as we always did. We absorbed fire that would have shredded baseline humans. We broke through barricades and cleared fortified positions. We stood over wounded soldiers and held off waves of enemies while the medici did their work. We did what Ogryns do best. We endured. But even we had our limits. During the assault on a particularly well-defended strongpoint, we came under fire from heavy weapons that even our thick hides could not fully withstand. I saw one of my Ogryn brothers, a good soldier named Vorth, take a direct hit from some kind of explosive round. The blast tore through his torso, and he fell with a cry that I can still hear in my nightmares. I ran to him, hoping against hope that he could be saved, but I knew before I reached him that he was already gone. Crag was beside me, and I saw the shock and horror in his eyes as he looked at Vorth's body. He had never seen one of us fall before. He had thought, as young Ogryns often do, that we were invincible, that our strength and toughness made us immortal. "Boulder," he said, his voice shaking. "Vorth he is with Emperor now," I told him, though my own heart was heavy. He fought good. He served faithful. Emperor watches over him. But even as I spoke the words, I wondered if I truly believed them. If the Emperor truly did watch over abhumans, or if we were simply tolerated accidents of evolution, useful for a time, but ultimately disposable. It was a dark thought, and I pushed it away. Faith, even doubting faith, was all I had left. We took the strong point. We always took the objective, no matter the cost. But Vorth was not the only one we lost that day. Another of my Ogryn brothers fell before the campaign was over, and I felt each loss like a physical wound, deeper and more painful than any injury I had sustained in battle. When the campaign finally ended, when the cultists had been purged and the hive reclaimed for the Imperium, there were only 3 Ogryns left in my squad: Crag, myself, and another named Throck. We stood together at a memorial service for the fallen, listening to a chaplain speak words about duty and sacrifice and the glory of dying in the Emperor's service. The words washed over me like rain, present, but not really penetrating. I was too tired, too worn down by loss and by the weight of decades of warfare. After the service, Crow came to me. He looked lost, his usual eagerness replaced by something darker, something that might have been despair. "Boulder," he said, "why we fight? Why we die? For what?" It was a question I had asked myself many times, a question that the bone implant had made me capable of asking, but had not equipped me to answer. But I could not let Crag see my doubts. He needed someone to believe in, someone to give him purpose and direction, and, if I could not be certain of the answers for myself, I could at least provide them for him. "We fight because it's our duty," I told him. "We fight because Emperor needs us, because small ones need us, because without us, more people die, more worlds fall. We are strong, Crag, we endure, and because we endure, others survive. This is what we are for, This is what makes our lives matter. He thought about this for a long moment, his broad face creased with concentration. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he said. I understand. We endure, so others not have to. Yes, I agreed. Is a good way to say it. We endure, so others not have to. And that, I realized, was the truth of it. That was the answer to the question of what it meant to be an Ogryn raised by humans in this grim and terrible galaxy. We were strong so that others could be weak. We endured so that others could survive. We bore burdens that would crush normal humans because we were built to bear such burdens. And in doing so, in accepting our role and fulfilling it with honor and dedication, we found meaning. We found purpose. We found a way to matter in a universe that too often treated us as disposable. It was not a perfect answer. It did not address all my doubts or heal all my wounds. But it was enough. It had to be enough. Because the alternative was despair. And I could not afford despair. Not for myself, and certainly not for the young Ogryns who looked to me for guidance. My final battle came during a campaign whose details have become hazy in my memory. There was an enemy that needed to be defeated. There was a position that needed to be held. There were soldiers who needed protecting. The specifics do not matter as much as what happened in those final moments. We were overwhelmed. The enemy came in numbers too great for us to hold against. Our position was collapsing, and soldiers were falling back in disarray, and I realized that someone needed to buy time for them to retreat, to regroup, to survive. Someone needed to stand in the gap and hold the line long enough for others to escape. That someone was me. It was always going to be me. This was what I had been training for my entire life. This was the moment where everything I was, everything I had become, would be put to its ultimate purpose. I told Crag and Throck to fall back with the others. Crag protested, as I knew he would. He wanted to stay with me, to fight beside me, to share whatever fate awaited, but I ordered him to go. I was a bonehead, a sergeant, and my orders were to be followed. He went, though I could see the anguish in his eyes. And then I turned to face the oncoming enemy alone. I planted my feet, raised my ripper gun, and I roared. It was not words, just a sound, pure and primal and defiant. It was the sound of an Ogryn saying that this far and no farther, that I would not yield, that I would make the enemy pay for every step they took. They came at me like a tide, and I met them with everything I had. My gun blazed until it ran dry, and then I used it as a club. When it broke, I used my fists. When my arms grew weak, I used my body, throwing my massive bulk against them, crushing them through sheer mass and momentum. I felt wounds opening across my hide, felt my strength beginning to fade, but I did not stop. I could not stop. Because behind me, soldiers were escaping. People were surviving because I was here, because I was holding the line. I do not know how long I fought. Time lost meaning in that final stand, but eventually, inevitably, my body reached its limits. A blow to my head sent me to my knees. Another to my torso drove the air from my lungs. I tried to rise, tried to keep fighting, but my legs would not obey. My vision was growing dark at the edges. My enhanced mind, that gift from the bone procedure, was struggling to maintain consciousness. As I fell, as the darkness closed in, my last thought was not of fear or regret. It was of Mana, of her small hands holding mine, of her teaching me to be gentle, of her belief that I could be more than what others expected. I hoped that I had lived up to her faith in me. I hoped that I had been worthy of the second chance she had given me, this mutant child that she had chosen to raise and nurture and teach. I hoped that I had mattered. I did not die that day, though I came close enough to feel death's touch. The soldiers I had protected, the ones who had escaped because I held the line, came back for me once the immediate danger had passed. They found me buried under the bodies of the enemies I had killed, still breathing despite wounds that would have killed a dozen baseline humans. They carried me to the Medici, who performed miracles of surgery to keep me alive. When I woke, days later, I found Crag sitting beside my bed. His eyes were red, and his massive hands were clasped together in a gesture of prayer. "Boulder," he said when he saw I was awake, "you came back. I prayed to Emperor and you came back." "It's hard to kill Ogryn," I replied, though speaking sent waves of pain through my battered body. "We endure." "You saved many," Crag told me. "Officers say you hero, say you earned honors, say you good soldier." Hero. The word felt strange applied to me. I was just an Ogryn. I had done what I was built to do, what my nature and my training and my faith had prepared me for. But if my actions had saved lives, if my sacrifice had mattered, then perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was what being a hero meant. My injuries were too severe for me to return to active combat duty. After months of recovery, I was honorably discharged from the guard and given a small pension to live on. It was strange, suddenly being released from the structure and purpose that had defined my adult life. I did not know what to do with myself, where to go, how to exist outside the context of warfare and service. I chose to return to Hive Morelius. It took most of my meager savings to book passage, but I needed to try to find Mana, to tell her what had become of the child she had raised, to thank her if she was still alive, or to honor her memory if she was not. The Hive had not changed much in the decades since I had left. The same grime, the same noise, the same crushing poverty of the lower levels. I made my way to the habitation block where I had grown up, moving carefully through corridors that seemed much smaller than I remembered. The block was still there, but much had changed. New families occupied the quarters that I remembered. New children played in the passages where I had once stumbled and learned. I asked about Mana, describing her to anyone who would listen. Most people shook their heads, unable or unwilling to help. But finally, an old woman pointed me toward a small shrine deeper in the lower hive. "That's where Mana rests," she said. "She passed maybe 10 years ago, but she's remembered. She helped a lot of people down here. Lot of kids she took care of, like she took care of that Ogryn." 10 years. She had been gone for 10 years, and I had never known. I would never be able to tell her what her kindness had meant. Never be able to thank her for seeing past my difference to the person underneath. Never be able to let her know that I had tried to live up to her teachings, to be gentle when I could, and to protect those who needed protecting. I went to the shrine and found her name among many others, carved into a simple stone memorial. I knelt before it, my massive body barely fitting in the small space, and I prayed. Not the formal prayers of the Imperial Creed, but simple words from my heart. "Thank you," I said, "for everything you gave me, for teaching me to be more than what I was supposed to be, for believing in me when no one else did. I tried to make you proud. I hope I succeeded." I stayed there for a long time, in that small shrine in the depths of Hive Morelius, honoring the memory of a woman who had shaped my life in ways that she probably never fully understood. And I realized that this was the final lesson she had taught me. That kindness matters, that how we treat others, especially those who are different or difficult or frightening, shapes not just their lives but our own. That love and patience can transform even the most unlikely subjects into something worthwhile. I am an Ogryn. I am an abhuman. I am unclean, they tell me, a deviation from the sacred human form. But I am also grim, called Boulder, who learned from a kind woman to be gentle when possible and fierce when necessary, who served the Emperor faithfully for decades, who protected those weaker than himself, who tried, despite every obstacle and prejudice, to prove that Ogryns could be more than what others believed us to be. Was I successful? I do not know. The galaxy is vast, and one Ogryn's life is just a small thing in the scope of its endless wars. But I know that I tried. I know that I honored Mana's memory by passing on her lessons to others. I know that soldiers survived because I was there to protect them. And I know that in my heart, beneath all the armor and augmentation and battlefield-hardened exterior, there remains a spark of the gentleness that Mana taught me. This is what it means to be an Ogryn raised by humans. It means living in two worlds and belonging fully to neither. It means being told you are tolerated, but never truly accepted. It means being strong for others because others cannot be strong themselves. It means finding faith in a God Emperor who loves even the mutated and the different. It means learning to be gentle, even when your size and strength make gentleness difficult. It means enduring, because endurance is all we have. But it also means hope. Hope that kindness can overcome prejudice. Hope that service can earn respect. Hope that even abhumans can be heroes. Hope that somewhere in the grim darkness of the far future, there is still room for gentle giants who protect rather than destroy, who save rather than kill, who choose compassion over violence when the galaxy allows them that choice. I am grim, I am bolder, I am an Ogryn, and I endure. The Emperor protects, but so do I, and that has to be enough. If you enjoyed this journey into the life of an Ogryn raised by humans, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking this video. Your support helps me create more deep dives into the rich lore of Warhammer 40K. Share your thoughts in the comments below about what you'd like to see explored next. The Emperor protects, and thank you for watching.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.